Alright, today I'm going to be tearing into a 2005 Yamaha V-star 650. We're going to tear this motor completely down. We're going to start with the cylinder heads. It's a V-twin motor, so we've got a rear and we've got a front here. Carburetor is sat here. I've done a separate video on how to remove that, how to clean that, so check those out. Also have your rear output yoke set here. I've done a video on how to replace that U-joint and how to remove that yoke off the motor. So several different videos that I've taken on this motor while we have this machine out for repair. I've done a valve inspection and valve adjust, so check those videos out as well. I've removed a couple bolts here because of doing the valve adjustments. So just to make things quicker, I didn't put those bolts all the way back on, but I've got on your front cylinder head here, we've got a plastic cover that's kind of a chrome plastic cover there. We've got four 5 millimeter Allen bolts that you got to remove to do those. And since we are doing this and going to put this back together, I'm going to mark these. Just quick reference, you should be able to figure them both out by just splitting them up to the motor, but I just wanted to mark those so we know real quick where they go. These were four 10 millimeter bolts that we've obviously already removed to pull that. And I'm just gonna mark as we go all of this stuff so we know exactly where it goes without having to hold it up and check microfiche, stuff like that. So you can use a Sharpie on these motors. What you do if you don't want the Sharpie on there anymore is just a little carbon choke cleaner, put it on a rag, and you can wipe that right off. So we've got rear, same thing, 4 5 millimeter Allens here to remove, and this cover just comes off. And then again, just 2 10 millimeter bolts on the back side here. Lift up and then push that back. There's 2 posts here that fit into rubber grommets on the back side there. So those are the covers. We got a vent tube here that runs up to the air box. We've got 14 millimeter mounts up here, bolts for the mounts right there. And we'll go ahead and remove this mount. And there is the rear mount. I'm going to go ahead and move this hose. Just pinch that clamp there. Two different mounts. And then we've got our cylinder head bolts right here. Those are 17 millimeter. And these are torqued down going back together. These are a specialty nut. So we're going to keep these together. We don't want to just throw them in with the rest of the nuts and bolts. Take the washers off because we've got these loose, these rocker covers loose because of doing the valve adjustment, but you don't actually have to loosen those up to remove these heads. On the front side, we've got same thing for mounts. 2 brackets there. And this one has a bottom plate as well. And same thing, 17 millimeter nuts there for the head. Pull the washers off, otherwise when we pull that head off, those washers will go flying. Got 5 millimeter bolts here to remove the cam sprocket cover here on this side. This is the back again. Then we can flip that motor and do the same on the other side. So that's removed there. Make sure that O-ring is good. Cylinder, we're going to go ahead and remove this at this time. I'm going to remove these water lines here. That way we can get to this cam chain tensioner. So we've got a 5 millimeter Allen down here as a mount for these water lines. And I'm going to spin that motor around. get those over there. So a couple mounts over here, or a couple Allens for the mount. I like to use a Allen, little old school Allen, looks like that, as opposed to a socket, especially to loosen these up. Seems like you can get a better hold on it. A lot of times you use a socket, you've got too much leverage and you strip these Allens out. So handful of Allens on these models. There's that other mount there. And then on the back side of your, or I guess it'd be the front side now of your motor here, there's a clamp. And then on the back side, there's a clamp too to remove those. Those are Phillips. And we could just take the clamp off in the middle here, but we've got to pull these off anyways. So I'm gonna see if we can get these loosened up. Sometimes due to the heat on these motors, sometimes it takes a little bit to get them free. And you don't want to just bend them. There we go. Pop one side off here. Pull these out from in between the cylinders here. All right. Now we're able to get to that other tensioner there. Back to pulling this rear head off. So loosen up these Allen bolts on the tensioner here. You can also use a 17 or it might be a 19 to pull that center bolt out of there. But you don't actually, if all you're doing is removing this, you don't have to pull that bolt out yet. But sometimes, because when you are going back together, you do need to loosen that up. This is a 19, so loosen it up now. Sometimes it's easier when it's being held on by the motor. This is what's putting pressure on this rear cylinder cam chain. Pull it off there, that's for the rear. So I'm gonna mark that. And now our chain is loose, and you can feel that in this sprocket here. We've got 17 millimeter sprocket bolts. Pull that off. Now the sprocket will be able to just use 2 fingers, pull it off. You don't want to do this if there's tension on that chain, which is why we remove that tensioner. And then we're able to pull that chain off. Now if all you're going to do was something in the cylinder head, maybe replace the valves or something, you don't want to just drop this chain in here. I'm not going to let it go very far down. I'm going to kind of bind it up. But if you drop it clear down in there, it could potentially fall clear down in your bottom end there. And if all you're doing is cylinder head, there's going to be no reason for you to get down in that bottom end, so just don't drop it down there. Got 2 6 millimeter Allens here on this rear head. Those are removed. Looks like we're going to pull this spark plug out here, because there is a bolt down in there. We might be able to get to it without pulling the spark plug. 12 millimeter bolt. There we go. Pull that one out. Now I believe that head is completely free. You can kind of wiggle it back and forth there. You shouldn't need to use any kind of a pry bar to pull this up. And you can just lift that off there. That is the cylinder head. On the rear, that's the bolt that we just removed there that fell down, and we'll go through that head on a different video. And now we've got your cylinder here, and looks like we've got 1 Allen to remove to pull that cylinder there. All right, loosen this one up. One of your guides, this be the back guide. We'll just pull right out. Your front guide there is attached down in your bottom end, so we'll have to pull that flywheel and stator to get to remove this other guide. We've got our cylinder here that'll just raise up now at this point. There we go, and there's your cylinder there. It looks good. The inside looks good on this one. No issues there. Then we can pull this gasket up just to get this out of the way. That's the rear there. I'm going to go ahead and pull this circlip on here. To do that, I'm going to grab a pick. I'm going to stick it in the little groove here. Put my thumb over top. That way that pin doesn't go, or that circlip doesn't go flying. Kind of wiggle my pick in behind there, being real careful not to damage that piston. There we go, and grab that clip. And then now what you can do is take and push out the pin that direction. So then we'll take and put that clip back down in this side there. So we have it all together, put those piston with that cylinder, and then we'll go ahead and do the same thing to the front. Really not a lot to pulling the heads off on these. All right, now we're gonna pull the front. So we've got our 5mm Allen wrench to remove the sprocket cover. Your front cam chain tensioner is gonna be kind of below your exhaust. You do have some oil coming out of here. Where it sits so low, sometimes that oil will kind of just, a little bit of oil will just stay in that area. It's held together by an O-ring or sealed up by an O-ring. Sometimes that O-ring sticks, but that's the front cover there. We'll go ahead and remove that sprocket. 17mm. Now you don't want to drop that down there if all you're doing is getting into this top end. All right, and then we'll have the 12mm clear down in there again, right by that spark plug. And now that head is ready to come off of there. Slide it up. And that's the front cylinder, or the front cylinder head there. You got your valves there, intake, exhaust. Got your exhaust system here. We got a broke off stud there. And the dome looks very, very good, clean for the age of bike and the miles. And we can clean that up, clean those valves up. Sometimes there's oil that sits down in that head, so I'm going to flip that on in there. Let that drain out of there. Got your Allen bolt right here to remove this cylinder. And we are ready to remove the cylinder now. Alright, cylinder's off. Those walls look good as well. And then to remove that piston, same thing. Put your finger over top. Get in behind that circlip. If you don't put your finger over top of it, that circlip could go flying. You could use it. If you're having to use that circlip again, you want to make sure you hang on to it. Also, if all you're doing is top end, you don't want that circlip dropping down into your crankcase. Then push that pin back down in there. Let's do the flywheel next. Alright, we've got 5mm Allens all the way around here. We have these caps off because of doing the valve adjustment. Check that video out on our channel. Got our rear cover off there, or stator and flywheel cover here. A couple different points that you can tap on if you can get to it with maybe a hammer or a rubber mallet. There are a couple of different parts here, or you can take a rubber mallet, kind of tap. I like to put pressure up on it. And there's going to be some pressure on here because of that flywheel being magnetic. And then you've got a gasket there holding it on as well, so you don't really know exactly what you're catching on. Then you got a shaft right here, your shifter shaft. That could give you fits as well. All right, stator is off there. That's your stator magneto assembly. Got your coils on there. That's your power source on your bike. And then clean this gasket area up. Before going back together, we'll have to take a razor blade and scrape this all off. Flywheel here is held on with a 14mm. Here's the puller that I'm going to use here. leave a little bit of a gap there, but I wanted something to put my puller on there. Take our 19 then, and gotta be careful we don't go up too far, but we just want to break this free. All right, that loosened it up there. If you've got a different way of doing that, please leave those in the comments below. That seemed to have worked just fine. If we had a little bit longer bolts, that would have been ideal. But that worked all right. So we got the flywheel off there. We've got a Woodruff key that sits in there. You want to make sure you pull that off, or you're going to have a hard time getting this idler gear off. And we've got our starter drive here, or one of our starter idler gears here. When the starter engages, when the starter motor engages, it turns this gear, which on behind this gear you can see there's larger teeth that are on this. And this, at this point, will spin either direction. Typically you would have this flywheel on it with this starter bearing in behind there, and this will only spin one direction. So you set it on there, you can see it'll freewheel one way, and it'll push the motor the other way. So when that starter is engaged, it engages this idler gear here, which engages your starter clutch. You let off of that, and that just spins and freewheels. So it's important that this gear is working, or this bearing is working. It's important that these teeth are good. Otherwise, your starter is just going to turn over and not connect to this gear here. There's a washer behind here, so make sure that gets put where it needs to go there, going back together. Now you can see we've got our gear, for our rear, our cam chain guide sits down here, two 10mm bolts to remove that. And that was for the rear. So then we'll take and we'll pull that rear out. You can see how that chain drops down in here. And it's important that you don't spin that motor over, because what happens is it'll bind in here and it'll break this holder off, and that is where your guide sits down into when that cam chain is out of the way. So the cam chain is like that, and you can see there it already got bound a little bit when we were messing with the motor, but that guide sits down in there like that. And so if that is broken, you may as well throw that case away. You don't want to just JB weld that or rig that up, as if you're going down the road and that locks up, you're going to have some serious problems. So cam chain is out, that rear guide is out. We've got our shift shaft here. I will, while this motor is turned this direction, this idler gear post will pop right out of there. No washers on behind here, so that idler gear will just set right on there. Again, that attaches to the starter that's there. No washers on either side of that. We've got an oil line coming down here. That's removed by a couple Allens. And I'm going to do another video on this yoke set, because we have to remove that at this time. I've done several videos on yokes. This is a pretty common problem, is for these U-joints to need replaced. So go ahead and grab a screwdriver. Go ahead and tap on the clip that holds that joint together. Sometimes it takes a little bit smaller screwdriver. Depending on condition, there's boots protecting this, but sometimes those boots allow water in, or just get water in somehow, and these joints can get rusty. So take and pop that clip out a little bit. I like to put my hand around it so it doesn't fly away, and then do the other side. So right now we're taking this yoke out. Do the other side of that joint. I like to just start it, and then once you start it, you can get a screwdriver. A lot of times you can get a screwdriver in behind there. Check my other videos. I've done videos on when these clips don't want to come out. I show you how an easy way of getting them out when they're just sitting there spinning. So check my other channel for that. Then take and tap on the yoke here. what that does is push the caps off. So there, it's out there. And if you're wanting to replace this joint, what I'd suggest doing if you're having to take this off, because these are $15 to $20 for a good one, and while you're there, you may as well put a new one in there. But because we've done other videos on this, I'm not going to go into detail on replacing that joint. We just need to remove this bolt here, or this nut. 7/8 nut there holding this yoke set on. Pull that out, you've got a spacer there. I'm going to set those together. Now we've got our output shaft sticking out here, and we can go ahead and remove this. There is shims on the bottom side here. I don't know if there will be on the top side, or if this is just a one-piece shim, but 12mm bolts holding that on. And this is aluminum, so be really careful you don't beat on this with anything that you can take. This is not a sealed area right here. Inside it is. You can take and put a little pressure on there to pull that out. And you can see there is the O-ring that seals everything, so obviously don't damage that. And don't damage this area. Here is our shims here that I was talking about. What these shims do is just determine how far in or out this gear is, and it's got a gear on the inside here, and I'll show you that when we split the case, but it's got a gear on the inside here, so the smaller your shims or the less shims you have, the closer this gear is going to be together. So you can see right here it's not spinning at all, so this would be drastic. If we had a whole bunch of shims, we wouldn't be touching at all. We pushed it in and left just a small space. When you turn that, there'll be no movement at all. So you don't want it tight. You can hear there. That's a little bit loose, but again, we have a pretty good gap in here. So they sell different sizes of these. You can reuse these. There's no sealed area on this around these shims here, so you can reuse those if it's exactly where it needs to be. But we'll pull that out for now. Those gears you want to replace together. So a lot of people will sell those separate. If you're buying a used one, you want to make sure you buy them together, because that's the way that Yamaha sells them, and you want to keep them that way. I'm going to go ahead and pull this oil line off here. 5mm, 3 different bolts here. And these aren't very tight. Typically these are pretty well lubricated from just oil draining down or dripping from different parts of the motor. So oil line is off there, and there is your strainer there, picking up from your bottom end. And so you want to make sure that screen in there is clean. You can spray carbon choke cleaner to clean that, or brake cleaner. I'm going to pull this clip off while we're here. Be careful. You've got a spacer in behind here that'll keep you from damaging that seal. So you want to make sure you've got it in that order. Circlip, washer, and then seal there. If that seal is leaking, which is pretty common because you're constantly moving your shifter there, you can just pull these 2 parts out, replace that seal, push a new one in there. Make sure your shaft is in good condition, not grooved or worn or bent, and pretty easy project to do. I'm going to go ahead and pull, since we've got the motor flipped on this side, I'm going to go ahead and pull a handful of Allen bolts and different bolts holding this case together. We've got our starter wire running to our starter motor that's going to come from the bottom here. This is our clutch cover. We've got a handful of Allens all the way around this. More than a handful. We've got a lot. This is every time you get into this area, you want to make sure you replace the gasket. This is typically a cover, as you can see here, that gets scratched up. Sticks out the farthest. if you lay the bike over or rub up against something. Three smaller Allens here. We'll remove this cover. And then a couple more Allens under here. So you do have to remove that smaller cover to remove this clutch cover. And your oil filter is under here. That's your oil filter there. Make sure that gets changed when you change the oil in your bike. Take a rubber mallet. There we go. Clutch cover's off there. We've got a seal right here that might have been holding us up. That is for an oil line that runs down. But that seal might have been holding us up there. We've got our clutch pack underneath here. That's a 10 millimeter to remove these. Pull all 5 of these off. And then what I do is just remove this top plate here. Now if you're rebuilding your clutch with new friction plates or new steel plates, you're going to want to get farther into it than I'm going to get. You can pull that cover off there. We've got a larger nut inside there, and you want to flatten this. Now if all you're doing is replacing friction and steel plates, go ahead and do that at this time. Pull them up. It's every other, and they kind of stick sometimes if they haven't been ran for a while. So again, you've got your friction plates there, then a steel goes every other. So if you're replacing your clutch, your plates, you want to make sure that you soak those in oil before you go back together with it. And since we're just pulling this whole clutch pack, we're just going to bend down this little tab that holds this nut on here. Loosen that up. A lot of times these aren't very tight because you've got that keeper here that keeps that nut from spinning. So it's a specialty nut. Make sure you go back on with the correct one. What this specialty nut is, this nut has got a taper on here. It's indented. It's supposed to go on this direction to push this, put more pressure on here. And this indentation here goes over top of these splines. So that's the reason they have that on. I'm actually going to take and put that back on there. Keep that all together. We've got your clutch adjust right in the middle here. So you see you've got a lock nut. You've got this that pushes on the actual release. When I flip this motor back over, there'll be a ball and a rod that goes through all the way to your other side where your clutch lever cable goes into. It's your clutch arm. And so that's why this is here, and this spins to adjust when your clutch is released. So now we can put this back on. You want to make sure that nut is not actually on. Slide that back on. I'm going to take and snug a couple of these up. And what I'm doing here is just making sure we keep all of that clutch pack together. I don't want plates going all over the place and the springs. So by doing this, you can keep the entire assembly held together. Now we're able just to take and pull this out as one whole pack. There we go there. Friction, steel, everything is together here. Now to remove that basket, we've got this spacer right here, this holder that's got splines on it, and that can freewheel in behind there, but then that keeps from that clutch pack from coming off there. So that is what's holding us on. And now we can remove that basket. You want to make sure that these teeth, make sure there's no grooves in here, make sure that's in good condition before you go back together with it. That's going to cause some drive issues. Got our oil pump here, and then we've got another one of these nuts that have the keeper on them. So take a flat screwdriver, flatten them down. I like to replace these going back together. If they've never been reused, a lot of times you can use them twice, but they're cheap if you're ordering parts anyways. Just replace them. And then we'll have to remove our oil pump. That gear came off. That's a specialty washer there, spacer. It lines up with that keeper. That keeper can come out now. That holds that gear into place as well. Those run that oil pump that's here. Need snap ring pliers now. Pull that snap ring off. Pull the oil pump there, oil pump gear. Then we've got 3 Allens underneath here. And we'll be able to wiggle that oil pump off of there. It's got a piece that runs down into the bottom case there, so that'll hold you up there. But that's your oil pump. We can put that gear back on there in that circlip. Keep that all together. That gear has got a groove in it to where it'll only go on one direction and it'll only spin. So I guess you could flip it over back and forth, but circlip is on the side with the little indentation, or the snap ring is. So now we can pull this gear off of there, and then underneath here is your front cam chain guide and your front cam chain. Cable is typically a 10 millimeter. We've got 2 10 millimeters holding that starter on. And what seals the starter is there is an O-ring. So that can sometimes be a little pain to get out, but just wiggle it back and forth to get that O-ring there that seals it up. This cable here we can remove. That's a 10 millimeter to remove that cable off the starter. We're just going to keep it all together. We've got our shift mechanism here, and you got to lift up on this. It's spring loaded. And then because we removed that snap ring on the other side, we're able just to pull up slightly, and we'll have to get that from behind that case there, and then we're able just to pull up on this. All right, we're going to pull the bolts around this crankcase and go ahead and split this crankcase at this time. We've got just 1 Allen bolt that's over here hiding from us. The rest of them are from the other side, so go ahead and pull that. It's a 5 millimeter, and then we can flip our motor over. There should be all the bolts out of the crankcase from this side, which should be the right-hand side. Now we're going to flip this over and pull all the ones on this side. We've got a handful of 5 millimeter and 6 millimeter Allens that we've got to pull at this time. And bottom side, we've got a couple here. We've got one up, which would be behind the flywheel there. And then we've got a couple larger ones. We've got 5 millimeter here. And the top behind our clutch release there, or clutch arm. We've got one. And that's all I'm seeing at this time for 5 millimeter. Now we're going to switch to a 6 millimeter. Right by the front cylinder there. We've got one right in between the cylinders. And then we've got that one down there by the shift arm. And that looks like it. I'm going to go ahead and pull this cover at this time. Just kind of take and spin it with your fingers. It's a pretty small, or a pretty thin cover, so it's kind of hard to pull out of there. But it is there to get to the other side of the transfer gear, the bevel gear, and then you've got a large nut in behind there. Problem is with pulling this at this time, you've got to find something that's going to go down in here to hold it. You don't want to damage that case. So if you use a cheater bar like this, just make sure you've got plenty of pressure in there to where it's not going to spin. Know which direction it's going to spin, and then keep it from spinning. You want to make sure you don't damage this surface area here, as that is sealed. Otherwise, if you do damage that area there, you'll have an oil leak. So got it pulled off there, and now we're able to slide that gear up. I'm going to grab a small screwdriver just so I can get in behind it. Obviously not going to pry and damage that gasket area, but my fingers are too big to get in behind there. And maybe I can't, and maybe I won't even be able to get underneath there until I split that case, but at least that gear is off there at this time. We've got all the bolts off. Now, flip this case up, grab a rubber mallet there. These gaskets will hold this case together. There we go. Now we're going to come out just fine. Alright, once we get some pretty good movement there, we can take and tip it up like this. Then you're able just to kind of walk it off of there. Our gear will be glad we took that bolt off of there, as that just kind of slid right up. Now that is the case split on a V-Star. We've got your crank here, we've got your shift drum here, and we've got several, this is your shift linkage here, and that pressure on there to remove that. So go ahead and tap that shift shaft out. So it's kind of binding this spring. This arm here was binding it. So then you can line this star up on the shift drum itself. Now that's just going to slide out of there. One shift fork just fell out. Make sure those two stay together. Our other shift forks there, I'm going to just move them out of the place there. There we go, we got our shift drum out of there. Now our shift forks will be able to slide out of there. Our crank we're just going to tap on from the other side. And we've got our transmission here that will just be able to lift out of there. So that is splitting the case on a 2005 Yamaha Vstar 650. If you have questions on that, make sure and let me know in the comments below. If you've liked this video or it's been helpful, please subscribe and share this video with others to help them. If you've got more ideas on videos on this Vstar 650, make sure you leave those in the comments below, as I'm always curious what kind of videos people are wanting me to do. So thanks a lot for watching.